Okay. Hi. We're here with the Coherence Lab, Lauren and Christine and I, and we'd like to talk about some of the things that we perceive are different in the model that we have and our approach to working with challenges and change. And one of the things we'd like to start with first is trying to step out of the expert role and beginning to see how being the expert can actually interfere with the relationship and the person finding their own path. So maybe, Lauren, have you got any thoughts about that you'd like to start it off with?
Yeah, as you were talking, Lois, I realized that over the year or so that this has evolved, I think we have released our grip more and more on that. When we train in a particular modality, that becomes a bit of our security in allowing us to sit with someone and share in their experience. It gives us a sense of authority and power, and I think for a lot of folks, it's the confidence that gives them the confidence to do that. And so, what I find that we're moving towards is more and more each time is a model where we can just drop that at the door. I don't need that anymore. So there's an evolution on its own of the practitioner participating in this to be able to let that go and just show up as themselves, which is something I don't know another modality to teach, to just show up as yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's interesting because, we each have an inclination to do that. We all want to feel powerful and have agency in the world. So that is an innate drive within us. And it's also been a huge push in the paradigm that we've come from, that we've lived in, that we are living in, right? Like there's this expertise path, essentially, right? Like most people are on some path to be an expert in something, right? And that's how we um, are valuable in the world, right? And so it is very interesting for us to recognize that that paradigm, and this is from a human design perspective, that paradigm is ending, right? So the future paradigm is very much about each of us owning our own expertise, right? That we are our own experts. And that doesn't mean that we can't learn from other people, and that doesn't mean that we can't give our wisdom to other people and our expertise to other people, but nobody is an expert over us or our own authority. And I think that's really what's beautiful about this moment in time between these two spaces. And what the Coherence Lab is kind of trying to do is kind of midwife us between this power over expertise world to this shared power. We're all experts at something world.
And in that being all experts at particular things is that it isn't that we are totally letting go of our expertise here. It's just we're not leading with it anymore. It's always there in the background, supporting and like in the approach and inquiring approach. Our expertise allows us to come up with different questions. We're curious about different things through the lenses of our expertise. So looking at it as I'm curious about certain things that I think might be important to you, but I'm going to ask you about it rather than tell you about it.
I love that, Lois.
And I mean, we're all the same as little children. We love what we find. Rather, when you give a child a gift and they're more interested in the wrapping paper in the box than they were than with the toy that you picked so carefully picked out for them. And we're no different. The things that we find and we learn for ourselves are the things that stick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think any of the changes I've made in my life have come because someone told me to make that change. And I think if we could all just set that with that for a minute and think about the monumental changes you've made and what you've accepted into your life or your beliefs, it certainly hasn't come through a top-down model of an expert informing you. It's because you came to believe this, like at your inner knowing. And I have found that this path that we're carving here with the Coherence Lab is as much a growth path for those of us participating as it is for the person that we're inviting in as our guest.
Yeah. 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 I think about this model and this idea of expertise as being kind of a hearkening back to how people used to live on the planet, right? There were always wise elders. That's who healed everybody, right? You just took your pain and suffering to the council of wise elders. It was often a group of people, often women, who heard you and listened to what the pain and suffering was, and right, and gave you advice as best as they could from their own perspective with, I think, less expectation, right? Recognizing that we're all on our own path, right? And all we can do is hold space for one another and give, our wisdom as it's asked for, right? But not have any real expectation. And I think that's another tricky part about, the paradigm we've come from, right? Practitioners come in with expectations as well, right? Clients come in, but so do practitioners, right? And so being aware of these things and trying to work through and release a lot of that, I think is part of what we're working on here.
And in that way of being that you're talking about, Christine, too, is like when people went to the elders, they they got heard. And when you get really, really get heard, you hear yourself. And sometimes that's when the realizations about what you're doing and how it's working for you really come through. Because you hear yourself say something and you go like, where does that come from? And in that realizing that we hold a lot of thoughts and opinions that aren't really in alignment with who we are, and that we have choices about which ones we want to hang on to and which ones we don't. And just being in that very safe space, in that relationship with the practitioner or with a group of practitioners or just a group of elders, is that it's the safety that you were describing. There was a peacefulness that I could feel when you were talking about it.
Mhm. And it's really difficult to hear yourself when someone is talking at you. And I mean, I think all of us have been in appointments with a practitioner where they felt really certain they knew what was going on with you and would even talk over you. And that really doesn't matter if that practitioner comes from a natural perspective, a more holistic perspective, or an allopathic perspective. I think that is equally predominant across both fields. It's, are they interested in hearing what I have to say? Because if they aren't, then I don't hold space in that equation. And there isn't even an equation there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say too is that there's a both and about this because we're not suggesting that if a person was going to come into this model, they have to totally give up their expertise. Is that it is in the listening deeply and finding out what's going on. As experts, we're in a better place to realize what's going to be really in service of this other person, what will be helpful, and what space are they in where they're ready to receive what we have to offer. So it's a much more gentle, graceful way of offering our assistance.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, Lois. And also, I think the other thing that we forget in some ways is that, yes, of course, we all come with our expertise. We all come with our lenses. We all come with who we are. But when we come together in this coherence lab, we come together, right? And so we are in an energetically different space and we create an energetically different space as a group than we do as individual practitioners, right? And that energy too is another, I think, key component to this where we're going in the future, right? This is a quote who's I can't remember the person now, but it's the solitary path we cannot walk alone, right? That's essentially what life is. We are all here to walk our own path, but we cannot do it alone. And this is where so much of our healthcare has been for so long, in this very one-on-one, if you're lucky, right? If you're lucky, if you get a long enough appointment to actually say what's really upsetting you or what you're struggling with, right? And that's just not enough for us, right? It isn't how we heal, and it isn't how we find coherence.
You just reminded me of Ram Dass saying, we're all just walking each other home.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that feels fairly complete for this element of what we wanted to share. So we'll be back with the second aspect of the different things that we think are happening in the Coherence Lab.